I gave a talk at the Brown Bag Zen meeting this past Friday that looked at optimism and pessimism in relationship to the troubled world we live in, even more troubled it seems since Friday. But what I talked about most there was the issue concerning climate change and its impacts on our cultural, political situation, contributing to the stress and dysfunction of it all, to our psycho-spiritual situation, certainly to the ecological health of our planet. Phyllis just said it was 109 in Paris or something. I tend to be an optimist by nature. I make lemons into lemonade. Always have plenty of sugar at hand. I always think there's a way out. There's a way around, a way through any difficulty. And really, I think our country is pretty optimistic, too. I don't think that Ronald Reagan was speaking only for General Electric when he said progress is our most important product. We have this sense of things getting better and better, at least we've had in the past. The attitude of optimism for me and many others is getting kind of stressed. My optimism and many of my baby boomer cohort sometimes finds itself in a kind of fallback position where we say, well, I'll probably be dead before it gets really, really bad. And if that's optimistic, I don't know. And I was in that frame of mind, that ambivalence state, that when I came across the Dark Mountain Project, which was part of the main thing I talked about on Friday. And as I understand it, and I'm just at the beginning, I'm not an expert on this, the Dark Mountain Project is a movement of artists, writers, photographers, others, that began in England with writers proposing a journal to respond to the situation of climate change and the potential ecocide connected with it through a radical reorienting of our sense of human-centeredness, of our human context and purpose, a kind of rewriting of the stories that provide us with our boundaries and our sense of dimension, in order to see ourselves not so much as the masters of the universe or rulers of all nature, but just as a really small part of a wider whole, a part of nature whose pride has led to the potential of a pretty great fall. The Dark Mountain Project takes its name from a poem by Robinson Jeffers, who was a local, famous but local poet, built his house out on Carmel Point. I don't know whether you've seen it, Tor House, a house and tower. And let me read the poem. It's called Rearmament. These grand and fatal movements toward death, the grandeur of the mass, makes pity a fool, the tearing pity for the atoms of the mass, the persons, the victims, makes it seem monstrous to admire the tragic beauty they build. It is beautiful as a river flowing or a slowly gathering glacier on a high mountain rock face, bound to plow down a forest, or as frost in November, the gold and flaming death dance for leaves, or a girl in the night of her spent maidenhood leading and kissing. I would burn my right hand in a slow fire to change the future. I should do so foolishly. The beauty of modern men is not in the persons, but in the disastrous rhythm, the heavy and mobile masses, the dance of the dream-led masses down the dark mountain. It was written in 1935. It's not overly optimistic, I guess. At least not from an American progress point of view. Jeffers spoke of advocating a dehumanism. Our culture is based on, or has been based on doctrines of humanism that arose 300-400 years ago, seeing man as the measure of all things, as they said. And the Dark Mountain Project says that's a big part of the problem. Its manifesto is entitled Uncivilization. That's the manifesto. The underlying dis-ease for modern human society is said to be in seeing human beings as somehow outside of nature, conquering nature, controlling nature for our benefit. Beginning with agriculture and the building of cities, which is what the word civilization implies, our species has altered the environment in ways that will lead to, if not extinction, then certainly to radical environmental stress with great impact. It's a human delusion to think that we're separate from nature, of course. That's not just in the last 300-400 years. That's what the Garden of Eden story, in a way, is about. It's the rejection of the pride of civilization that drove Abraham to leave Chaldea. So this view of human folly in our overdependence on ourselves and our idolatry of progress isn't alien to our tradition. And it's important to realize that none of this was done out of malice. Nobody set out to mess things up. We've taken these steps that end in these consequences with the best of intentions, trying to solve earlier problems, serious problems, starvation, plague, even environmental problems. The internal combustion engine was seen originally as a great step in cleaning up the urban environment, which was inundated with horse manure. The pretense of human control isn't just manifest in the negative effects on human-caused climate change, it's also manifest in the ways that we instinctually go about trying to deal with climate change as just another problem for us to solve, because we're so smart. But to apply civilized solutions to the problems of civilization, or technological solutions to the problems of technology, is really like trying to get out of a hole by designing a new shovel. We have this species-wide narcissism that's maybe been part of the chutzpah that's made us dominant, but also has caused the ruin of the planet. But it's also a species-wide narcissism that thinks that we can really ruin the planet in the first place. We can ruin it for us, I suppose, or at least our lifestyle, but the planet's going to survive. Life will survive. Probably humans will survive in a certain way, not without disruption, not without probably a lot of suffering. Global warming is a fever that the Earth is experiencing to get rid of a virus. And unfortunately, the virus is us, at least the way that we currently live. So if morning is broken, we're not going to be able to fix it. Only God can do that. The Dark Mountain Project says that where we need to start is by getting real, by realizing how insignificant really we are. In a talk to the Zen group 2 weeks ago, Robin Robinson described an exercise at a Dark Mountain workshop that helped people experience that insignificance. They took people on what I think was called an Earth walk, maybe? I don't know. The Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. So they took this walk of 4.6 kilometers. Not too strenuous, but long enough. And there was a guide who described along the way over that 4.6 kilometers what was going on in the equivalent age of the Earth as it unfolded during the walk. It was only in the final quarter inch of that 4.6 kilometers that the human species showed up on Earth. Dark Mountain calls us to stop thinking it's all somehow about us. That's a basic part of the problem. Our achievements, our projects, our perspectives, our values. Our meaning, if we're to have meaning, can't rest with us. It can only be found by understanding our relative position in what Eucharistic Prayer C calls the vast expanse of interstellar space. And that can be humbling. It should be humbling. But when you get it, when you can think of how small we really are, that can be very freeing. Being responsible just means we should be able to respond. It doesn't mean we're in charge. We may be fallible, but it's not all our fault. And the Dark Mountain people call artists to begin to write stories. To create new perspectives that are grounded in that truth of relative insignificance. And those new stories, that new perspective can, I believe, grow out of the stories that we tell here, the perspective of our tradition. I think our tradition is more clearly aligned with this than civilization than the arrogant stories and of progress that it tells itself. Civilization has used Christianity, certainly, over most of its life to justify itself, to cover up its tracks, to put makeup on the scars it's caused. But it's never been really an easy fit when you look very deep into it. Not only in Genesis, with Eden and Abraham, but in the lessons today. We hear a call to think beyond our human-centered, limited view of just taking care of ourselves and open up to this vaster reality that we live in. If you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. You have died, it says, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. One's life does not consist, Jesus says, in an abundance of possessions. If you want to relax, eat, drink, and be merry, this very day, your life might be demanded of you. And that sees us in an even larger context than the Dark Mountain Project speaks of. God is more than 4.6 billion years. God is beyond the 13.8 billion years that are thought to be the age of the whole universe, let alone the earth. God's beyond any other older universes that may or may not have existed. God is eternal. So what's a quarter inch to the eternal? Talking about significance. But that's where we have to start, with that insignificance. And yet, we also affirm within our tradition that from that position of infinite smallness, insignificance, we can relate with the vastness. That the Word that was God was with God, eternally begotten, became flesh and dwelt among us, became flesh and dwelt as one of us. And that incarnation transformed or showed forth the transformed possibilities of what otherwise are totally insignificant lives, because we share in its ultimate significance somehow. The unique shaping of God's Spirit through a temporary structuring of the dust of creation that constitutes an individual life, which is actually 1/2000th of a quarter inch at its best, or longest at least. That minuscule blip that is our whole life is also eternal, because it's hidden with Christ in God somehow. The ascension was not an abandonment. Seeking Christ above doesn't mean we have to forget where we are here and now. It just helps to put it in this larger, truer context, without all the delusions of grandeur. There's a lot of joy in life. There's much to love. But when we get beyond ourselves, as the preacher says in the book of Ecclesiastes, it's all vanity. the unwarranted pride that we have in our civilization is in for some humbling, some difficulty. But thankfully, I think that humbling is also a vanity as well, because being small as we are is only humiliating for those who think they have to be great. The truth is a mystery that encompasses it all. As our diocesan hymn says, we know not where the road will lead, but we follow day by day. Because it's God's road, God's way that we are walking. And we're not walking it alone. Thanks be to God.